All right, we're joined by Senator Jeff Irwin. Today, I've had you on here or asked you on to talk about the bill you introduced in the Senate. First of all, how are you doing? How's your family? And how's everybody holding up?
Oh, things are good. I've got a couple of kids who are 8 and 11, and they're doing pretty well, and they're still pretty engaged with their schoolwork, and we keep them pretty busy as well. And my wife and I both are, working from home, so we're very fortunate in that way. But we're both very, very busy. I'm sure that many of the folks listening may, know about just how overloaded our unemployment system has been, for instance, and just trying to handle all the many hundreds of calls we're getting just on unemployment and try to help people, connect them with the right resources, either walk them through the system if maybe there's something, some sort of error in their filing, or knock on the back door on unemployment and try to help people work out their problems. That's kept us very busy.
All right. You're in the news earlier this week all over the state of Michigan for the bill that you introduced. Tell us a little bit about what this bill is and what it does.
Absolutely. So I just introduced Senate Bill 909, which would make Michigan the sixth vote by mail state. What my bill proposes to do is to essentially use the system we have in place for absentee ballots to make sure that every single voter gets an absentee ballot application, and that everyone is sort of invited and facilitated to vote through the mail. My bill does retain still the option for people to return their ballot in a multitude of ways. Most importantly, it retains the ability for people to register on the day of elections, which is something that we added to our Constitution in 2018, and drop off their ballot at a local clerk's office or a sort of designated drop box that a local clerk would set up. So in addition to that, we also maintain accommodations for disabled voters and we basically, like I said, use the existing system that we use for counting absentee ballots with absentee count boards and the sort of, bipartisan challengers and all the sort of safety and security that we use in that system normally, but just to sort of ramp that up and do that with a high majority of our voters. I propose we do this for a number of reasons. Most importantly, other states, 5 other states, Utah, Hawaii, Oregon, Washington, Colorado, have showed us that you can run safe, secure elections and save millions of dollars. And to me, that makes a ton of sense. It's always been something that's made a lot of sense to me. But the thing that held me back, when I was a state rep many years, the thing that held me back from introducing this was that I do love voting. And so that's the rub here, is that for those of us who just love walking in and who just really enjoy that process, moving it more to mail will save us millions of dollars. It makes a lot of sense. It's much more efficient. It makes a lot of sense also during this current apocalypse, but there is something to be lost with just how much fun it is to go vote.
Well, yeah, watching the footage in Saline, the voting line seemed fine during the Democratic primary voting, but I saw some of the footage from some of the I think from Detroit. I think were there some problems at some of the polling stations around the University of Michigan where there were long lines. And at the same time as you were hearing all these warnings about COVID-19 just start to really kind of sound scary, you saw these people in lines, and it was like, what are we doing? And then a month later or whatever it was, in Wisconsin, by that point it seemed absurd to have people waiting in line while there's a pandemic.
Yeah, so what I observed, and what I'm pretty sure is the case, is that there were long lines at city halls, particularly in college towns. So I was standing outside of Ann Arbor City Hall for many hours that evening, and there were a lot of folks who were trying to take advantage of the opportunity to register and do same-day registration, which was only available at City Hall. And so I think one of the things that those city clerks in those communities learned is that they have to be prepared for what same-day registration is going to mean. And one of the advantages of my legislation is it really consolidates that election work. The reason why it saves millions of dollars is because instead of having these clerks having to recruit a whole thousands of election workers to be trained and to sit at these polls all day long, instead they can consolidate that effort into a more centralized, efficient group that just count the ballots more cheaply. But two, as you point out, during this pandemic, I think that if it was hard for the clerks to recruit these individuals to be election workers before, it's going to maybe be even harder this fall.
Right. Why? Well, I guess you've already answered this, but why totally end in-person voting, and why not just sort of make it an easier option, which I guess it already is, right? Absentee voting is already in place, but but why? I know there's going to be a lot of people who say I still want to vote in person. So why do you think that's crucial?
Well, that's one of the reasons why I retain the opportunity in the proposal for people to go and turn their ballot in person. Some people who don't trust the mail. There are some people who just they want to see their ballot going into that box, and so that for those folks who retained that option, I think that's important for folks. And yet, I also think that by moving more of our elections to mail, by making the process of applying for an absentee ballot, getting that ballot, and then filling it out. By making that the main process by which people vote, I think there are a number of advantages. I've already mentioned what I think is the key advantages, which is just saving millions of dollars at a time like this where we're facing a budget crisis in the state of Michigan because of COVID-19 and our response to it. Saving millions of dollars means that there are critical programs for people in need that can be protected, or there are educational programs that are going to be on the chopping block that can be protected. So I think that's an important reason. Another important reason I think is makes it advantageous to move to a vote by mail system is that it's better for voters. When you talk to voters in these 5 states that have already moved to vote by mail, one of the things you find is that your intuitive sense of what would happen in a vote by mail universe is true. People enjoy being able to vote at their kitchen table. People enjoy being able to do a little bit more research. Most of us who voted a lot of times, we've walked into the polling place before and we've come upon a judicial race that we didn't hear a lot about. Or maybe nothing, or we come upon a millage proposal that is just worded in a way that seems kind of confusing. And it's like, well, I thought I knew what these millage proposals were about, but the way this one is worded is very confusing to me. So it would give voters in those kinds of situations more of an opportunity to, just mull over the decision, double check, the data, research candidates. Some candidates are hard to find information on. And so I think it's a big advantage for voters in that way. Another good reason to do it is that what you've seen in these other states is that it increases not just voter satisfaction, but voter participation. And we want more people to participate in our democracy. We want more people to have their vote included, and vote by mail is shown to increase that. I can go on. One more reason I'll offer, just off the top, is that one of the things that you mentioned a moment ago is one of the things that really has just bothered the heck out of me for years and years and years, which is this. In the state of Michigan, voting rights are not equal. And if you go and you talk to a voter in a crowded precinct, a precinct that's maybe all the way up to the 3,000 voter max, oftentimes in a place like a city of Detroit or even here in Ann Arbor, in these crowded precincts in a hot election, people have to wait to vote. Sometimes if the precinct is being run very efficiently, they might only have to wait a half hour or an hour, but sometimes they have to wait 3, 4, 5 hours to vote. People have to work, people got to get back to. It's insane to put that kind of barrier in the way of people voting. Whereas in other parts of the state, more rural parts of the state, where the precincts are larger and there are fewer voters per precinct, people can just walk right in. It's a breeze.
That's what I noticed here in Saline during the Michigan primary. It was easy. People walk in, no line, go in and vote, and then you come home and you see the TV news. You're like, what's going on everywhere else?
Yeah, and that's a fundamental unfairness in our system now. And by moving more of the system to a mail-based system, by pushing out those ballot applications, inviting people to utilize the mail or to utilize a drop box to vote, that's going to help solve some of those problems, right? And there are people who have struggles with getting off work or with finding childcare. This smooths that out. This says, no, everybody's going to get a ballot in the mail. You're going to be able to fill that out on your own time. You don't have to get Tuesday off.
I've often, one of the concerns listed by a lot of people is voter fraud. And I've often thought that the voter fraud angle has been overplayed a lot, and it's kind of been used to sort of, flout or to promote voter ID laws, which could disenfranchise more voters and stuff like that. But at the same time, there's so many, I don't know how many billions of dollars are going to be spent on 2020. Won't there be some temptation for people to just literally buy votes? And what kind of protections are we going to have from something like that?
Yeah, and so I do think there's always concerns about this. I agree with you that a lot of times these concerns are overblown and they're used as a rationale to push back against reasonable voting reforms that would make voting easier for people. What I've noticed is that over the years, we've spent a lot of money on auditing elections. We've spent a lot of money on studies to try to look for voter fraud. And what we find is that there's very, very little voter impersonation that has ever happened
Mhm.
that we'll find here in the United States. And oftentimes, at least the audits that I've looked over very, very closely here in the state of Michigan, what will happen is they'll initially find a series of irregular votes, but then when they look into them, they find out, oh well, it was actually a clerical error, or oh, it turns out there's two Bill Johnsons in this area, and so. The reality is that we spend a lot of money looking for impersonation and auditing elections, and we don't really find it. If the concern is that by moving to a more heavily absentee voting vote by mail system that we will increase that kind of fraud, I just don't buy that for a couple of reasons. Mainly the one we just stated, which is that people don't generally engage in vote fraud. Why don't they do that? The reason they don't is because it's a felony to commit vote impersonation, and you're only going to steer one vote. And, so like one felony for one vote is not good math. It just really isn't. That's why the real instances of election fraud you've seen in the United States have been situations where election officials have committed fraud, or politicians who have put their finger on the scale in some sort of way because they can actually control a volume of votes. Steering one vote doesn't usually make a difference. And, once again, you're taking on a huge penalty to do so. The other thing I would just mention, because I think it's important, is that if there are people who are committed to committing that felony, and they're committed to engaging in voting fraud, either by voting for dead people or dragooning some vulnerable person into voting the way they want through the mail, in all those situations, that individual could do that now with the existing absentee ballot system we have. Someone, I think, who is so dedicated to committing vote fraud, who's willing to commit a felony to steer one or two votes, well, they can do that now. And my other answer is that there is security in place for verifying absentee votes, and that's the system that we would use. And I would encourage anyone who is concerned about the kind of security we have for absentee votes to consider what I believe to be true, which is that the level of security that you have when you're comparing signatures is actually better than the level of security you have when someone's just coming through a line and showing you an ID and matching it up with an address. The level of sort of scrutiny that gets applied at the polls is not tremendously high. And actually, if you watch what absentee ballot count boards do, the level of scrutiny with the signatures is I would argue, higher.
What about the concerns of the mail? And it's not so much not trusting the mail, but in Saline, even before COVID-19, I've noticed a lot of complaints about mail not getting to homes or mail getting delivered to the wrong homes, or just not happening. And now, since the coronavirus, the mail has slowed down. Sometimes it takes 3 weeks for mail to just get through town. Is the Postal Service up to the task of delivering an election? That seems like a big ask at the moment.
Yeah, I think they are, personally. They've done it reliably in other states, election after election after election. The Postal Service has a long and proud history in our country, and I agree with you. There's been some problems recently. I don't know if you've been at any of the town halls that Congresswoman Dingell has had around mail delivery. I think some of those were maybe last spring.
Right.
There were some real issues, particularly on the east side of the county and in the Saline area. And so, yeah, I mean, these issues do come up in a big organization like that. There's always management struggles. I think it's a concern that, if we're going to rely more heavily on the U.S. Postal Service to be more involved in our elections than they already are, I think that is going to require additional accountability and scrutiny. The beautiful thing about moving to a more aggressive vote by mail system is that, when you save millions and millions of dollars, you can roll some of that into some additional scrutiny, security, election auditing, and, ballot chasing. And if you've looked at what they've done recently with absentee ballots here in Michigan, and this was really active during the presidential primary, the Secretary of State and your local clerks are all working together to make sure that you know where your ballot is at. You can track your ballot. There are websites you can go to see the status of where your ballot is. When it gets received, they post that information. So as a voter, you can say, well, I sent that, I think it should be there by now. I'm gonna go check to make sure they got it. And they're gonna actually tell you whether you got your ballot or not. That also is part of a process that's available where if you turn in your ballot and you realize oh no, the candidate that I vote for just said that, they just said that they're pro-life and I'm pro-choice. I didn't know that. I'm really broke. That's a fundamental issue for me. So I'm going to go, I want to change my vote. You can do that. You can go into the and you can say, I want to spoil my ballot, right? And so that happened a lot during the presidential primary because people might have voted for Kamala Harris or a Pete Buttigieg, and then that candidate dropped out. And, a lot of folks wanted to change their ballot. And so that process is available to folks too. And to answer your question, there's this whole way that voters can track their ballot, see where they're at, make sure that they're turned in, even if it is through the mail.
A couple more questions here. One of the problems, even I grew up in Canada, and one of the problems there when we used to do enumerating, which is a way to get people registered, poor people often didn't live where you thought they did because they moved around more. And that's been a problem for voter registration here in the United States. How's that? Does having a mail-in system, I mean, I think that adds another hurdle, I think, for some of these for some of these people who move around a little bit, or maybe it doesn't, but that it does seem like something that's going to something that's going to have to be addressed, I think, by a mail system. It needs to be addressed anyway, I think, but especially if we're going to go by the mail route.
Yeah, I think to your point, this is this is an issue already. How do we serve voters who are moving around a lot for one reason or another? How do we serve homeless voters? These are concerns with the existing system we have. I would encourage you to look at what I believe to be the reality, which is that the system as we have it now is more challenging for those voters than if we were to move to a vote by mail system or move to an all absentee ballot system. What happens to a lot of these voters now, and I've seen countless people turned away at the polls over the many years I've been involved, is that people will come, they'll show up at a polling place. Maybe it was the last address they lived at, maybe it's the address they live at now in the neighborhood they live in now, and they want to vote. And it turns out, well, you're not registered here. And you'd think we would have solved all of that with same-day registration, but the direction now is, well, you got to go down to the clerk's office. And a lot of folks won't make that step. A lot of folks don't have time for that step. And before we had same-day registration, it was a real tough situation for folks because they get told, well, you're not registered here, where you're registered back, or you go find out where you're registered. And so, the system we had now is not really working for those folks very well, and it shifts them around. And same-day registration made a big difference, a big positive difference in that way, but it still is a struggle for those folks. The value of vote by mail is that these folks will know whether or not they're getting their required ballot application or not. There's gonna be advertising around it. It's all gonna go out. If they're not getting at the address they think they should be getting at, there's a process for them to say, no, send it to me here, or they can go down to the clerk's office and submit it right then and there. What this really does is it kind of extends the election day out. And it says that for those folks who are in that category you're talking about, who are the folks who have the hardest time maybe getting that day off or getting alternate childcare, what it really says for all those folks is that this is election season. And if you come in here at any time during these, several weeks or maybe a few weeks, you can get it done here at the clerk's office. And also, if you want, we'll handle it all through the mail, so you don't even really you can do it in the evenings, you can do it whenever you want. So on balance, this is a better system for those folks.
The last question I have is about privacy and voting without fear of offending the person looking over your shoulder, whether it might be a family member, a son, a father, or a spouse. You're voting at home, and you can still do that. You can still take it up to your room or whatever and vote and vote separately. But I wonder if there's something really important about the idea of that thing where you go to your city hall or your polling place and you vote by yourself with nobody looking over your shoulder. Are we losing something, do you think, if we don't have that anymore? Where it's like that's just how it's done. And I know we're kind of shifting that way anyway. There's more absentee ballots than ever out there. But I wonder what that means for voting in the United States of America.
Yeah, I mean, as I said earlier, I have very romantic and positive feelings about the whole process of going in to vote. I'm one of the folks who wants it to happen in the elementary schools, and I want to see the kids seeing people going in. And, these aren't strangers; these are our neighbors. These are our community members. So I do think there is something real to be lost. That's why I said at the beginning, I think there's something real to be lost around the idea that we're going to come together at this neighborhood hub, and you're going to see people that are in your neighborhood, and you might wave at them, and these might be folks that you don't see enough, and this is an additional opportunity for you to connect with them. So yeah, I think there's something to be lost with that. With respect to the other concerns, I think those are real concerns, the ones that I share. But I think that largely the answers to those concerns are the ones I gave earlier, which is that the very stiff penalty, combined with the fact that anyone who's really committed to commit that kind of wrong can do so now. Make this a move that doesn't really exacerbate those concerns.
Well, I thank you so much for your time today and for doing what you think is right in the Senate every day, I'm sure. And I hope everything kind of calms down a little bit in Lansing, and you guys can get to work and maybe come to some agreement on ways forward on these things. Oh, last question on this. Do you have some support in the legislature for this or from the governor's office? Where do you see this thing going?
Yeah, it's very interesting, and it gives me an opportunity to make a point that I failed to. We haven't gotten an official opinion from the governor. I should just answer your question in a straightforward way. We haven't also gotten an official sort of up or down endorsement or disendorsement from the Secretary of State. But I do want to say that if you look at what Secretary of State Benson has been saying about these issues recently, she's certainly pushing in the same direction. Look at what she did, the action she took with the May 5th primary. Together with the governor who put it in her executive orders. What they basically said together was, we're going to do exactly what is in my legislation. We're going to mail every single voter that has an active election on May 5th. We're going to mail them an absentee ballot application. And if they turn that application around and everything checks out, we're going to mail them a ballot, and we're going to try to push as many of these voters as possible through a by-mail system. And what ended up happening in the May 5th election was that clerks across the state said it went beautifully. They all said that this was the right thing to do, Democrats and Republicans. Voter turnout was almost double what it would normally be in this sort of like off-cycle election. I think it was from 11 or 12% up to about 20. And, and a very, very low percentage of people actually showed up at the polling places. And what they did is they consolidated polling places, basically exactly like what I'm proposing. So, I think that what happened on May 5th shows that what is it I'm proposing can work. Is there support in the legislature? I know that there are a number of Democrats who support this proposal. I've had a lot of my House colleagues reach out to me and say they're interested in being supportive and finding a way to be supportive in the House. I've had a number of my Senate colleagues, including the Democratic vice chair of the Senate Elections Committee, Senator Voinio, who is a former clerk, reach out and say this is something he wants to be supportive of. And so there's a lot of support on our side of the aisle. The struggle is going to be on the other side of the aisle. I think that President Trump has really kind of made it a bit of a cause recently to push against vote by mail. I think that is because the Republican Party has traditionally been against anything they think will increase turnout. They're very, very worried about more people voting, and that's a logical concern on their part. It's interesting because a lot of the Republican legislators themselves don't really share what I would call an anti-voting bias, but their party does. Yeah. And the party believes it's in their interest to have less people vote. And so as a result, what ends up happening in the legislature is a lot of times when these proposals start to get a little bit of motion, sort of like we had with no reason absentee or same-day registration many years ago, things that the public totally supports, things that other states have been doing for a long time. What would always happen is when we get sort of on the precipice of a real conversation, the party would come in and really try to ice it out. That's my greatest concern in terms of the prospects on Senate Bill 909 going forward.
All right. I appreciate your time so much, and thanks, and have a great day.
Yeah, you too, Trent. Take care.
Bye-bye.